So good evening, everyone. Welcome to the October 17th meeting of the Housing and Community Development Committee. Glad to see so many people here. We have a pretty important topic for discussion this evening. I'm just going to first mention, if anyone is listening in at home, unfortunately, the video of the chamber isn't, you're not going to be able to see us. You'll just be able to hear us. So that's a little technological issue at the moment. But anyway, so we have very full. Are they okay? So I get. Do we need to do a roll call, please? Okay, somebody.
Lauren Berlin.
Here.
Kathy Feingold.
Here.
Hugo Rodriguez.
Here.
Joanne Zolomie.
Here.
Chloe Thurston. Here. And then Councilmember Revelle.
Here.
Councilmember Burns, Harris, and Reed are absent.
Okay. But we have a quorum, so we can do our business. So thank you very much. And our first item is going to be public comment. So, and I think,
Yes.
Marion, you have the names of people signing
We
up.
have 5 people signed up. Mark Carlin is in person for public comment.
Mhm.
If you want to go to the podium.
Right. And we're going to have a little timer that give a little 2-minute timer, and you'll see the clock ticking down to tell you when you're getting close to the end. So please go ahead.
Hi, I'm Mark Carlin. I live in the 9th Ward at 442 Elmwood. My wife and I have been landlords for 2 units in Evanston for about 10 years. And I'm here tonight to wholeheartedly endorse the just cause for eviction ordinance. I feel that it's our responsibility to be very responsive to our tenants. And so if they call us and say that there's a screen that's broken, we get a new screen, a lock that's broken, we get a new lock. We just had a new tenant, we put a whole new bathtub in. And I think I've read in Evanston Roundtable about some of the testimony for this committee. And a lot of tenants are of the mindset that their leases were terminated or they were evicted because they complained about problems in their units, and the landlords weren't very happy about that. I think that when you look at a hotel, for example, and a person who's there complains about the plumbing, the toilet won't work, or the shower head won't work, it's the responsibility of the hotel to fix it. It's their property. And I think the same thing applies to the relationship of landlords to tenants. I think it's counterproductive for landlords not to keep the properties in good shape because it's their investment. And so I think we should just take a look at, again, what the hotel industry does. And I feel there's a lot of importance in maintaining the property, and therefore I support just cause for eviction ordinance.
Great. Thank you. Perfect timing.
Next, we have Bev Paul.
Good evening, committee members, and thanks for the opportunity to speak. My name is Bev Paul, and when I moved to the Avador, I thought I was joining a safe, welcoming community and it would be my last move. Now I feel very vulnerable and uncertain about my future there. That's why I'm asking you to approve just cause to protect renters like me from arbitrary non-lease renewals. Many Avador residents are afraid to speak up, so it's unclear how many tenants have been forced to move because of management's refusal to renew leases with or without cause. Results of a recent survey conducted by residents show that people feel disrespected and intimidated by Avador management. Residents' rights to free speech have been infringed upon. For example, there are incidents of residents receiving threatening letters and being summoned to the manager's office and reprimanded because of negative remarks they made. Petty things, such as criticizing lobby decorations during a private conversation. We are private citizens in an apartment building. There is no justification for management monitoring our speech. After a recent armed robbery at the building, management sent out a notice sharing no details about the incident, but admonishing residents from discussing, spreading rumors, creating fear-mongering or unnecessary worry. The letter also said in all caps, and I quote, "We will not be fielding any questions from you," unquote. So it's not the unknowing that causes fear. If management had respected residents and had truthfully shared information, there would have been no speculation about what had happened. So I just urge you to pass just cause. And once again, I thank you for the opportunity to speak.
Thank you very much.
Aaron
This is
Bornstein.
Councilmember Reed. I just want to be added to the roll, and I will be joining in person shortly.
Okay,
Yeah, I'm gonna speak with the Wilshire Album providers, so.
Alan Goldberg.
Good evening. My name is Alan Goldberg, and thanks for giving me the opportunity to speak about this proposed ordinance. I've been an Evanston resident for over 45 years. I've been a housing provider in Evanston also for over 45 years. And I have a lot of thoughts. I've been a professional real estate broker, developer. I spent many years working with Chicago Housing Authority on affordable housing and helping them find scatter site housing. So I kind of know the issues and am sympathetic to it. I'm opposed to this ordinance because I call it the lifetime lease ordinance, because once a person signs a one-year lease, and a lease is supposed to have a beginning and an end, this ordinance will create no end to the lease. Someone signs a one-year lease, they will have a lifetime right to renew, but the tenant has no obligation to renew. So it's an unfair situation. And I don't think that it will do what people who are in favor it said. It will make housing providers more restrictive to the most vulnerable population of renters, young people, people just starting out with marginal credit, where people will give somebody a chance to get an apartment. They're going to be, once they get someone in their building, you can't evict them without paying onerous moving and relocation costs. So if you get a bad apple, someone who's causing problems for the other tenants, it's stuck. So it's going to be, landlords will be more careful about who they rent to, just to allow them into the building. And so I just don't think that it will benefit the people who think that this is going to be benefiting in the long run.
okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And I believe that is it for public comment.
Okay, whoops. Oh, people signed up. I know William did, I know.
Yeah, I have a sign-in sheet. There's a checkbox for public comment
Oh,
that wasn't, so I'm happy
probably-
to pull anybody that was on
Yeah,
the
thank
sign-in
you,
sheet.
because I think people probably,
Sure.
that's not our usual.
And I'll
crowd.
note there are folks online who have their hand raised as well.
Yeah, we are doing public comment in person and in writing for these meetings. The next person is Eileen Thomas.
Just a point of information, I will note that it was shared by staff. I see Eric Bassett, who is one of the Just Cause Task Force members. It was shared that he would be able to give public comment virtually, and so I just hope that we honor that.
Yes, no, certainly when we get to that discussion, we're happy to call on them for their comments. Go ahead.
Well, a lot of the wording in the proposed changes in the ordinance is very vague, so I hope I'm reading it correctly. It's in various ways. It says the relocation fee is based on the median rent for an apartment with equal number of bedrooms in Evanston. And the rent for this reclaimed apartment is lower. Isn't that a penalty to the landlord who has kept the rental amount lower? Let's say the apartment rental for this reclaimed apartment is $1,500 and the median Evanston rental amount is $2,000. And the landlord must pay a location fee for 3 months. Then this landlord is effectively paying 4 months fee. $500 difference times 3 months equals $1,500. This is penalizing landlords who provide more affordable housing. And unless I am reading this wrong, this is what I feel about it. If I give more affordable housing and have to pay a relocation fee, I am being penalized. People who get more can cover more. And I think this is a very bad proposal. Thank you.
Thank you. And I think when we get to the discussion of that part, I think that's a misunderstanding of what the draft is, but we'll get to that. Who's
Next, we have
Mary?
Michael Thomas.
Thank you. Eileen and I have been landlords for more than 50 years. We have personally put more than $500,000 into our 3 rental units. We live at the corner of Greenleaf and Ashland. We live in a converted 2-flat as a single family home. We have a 2-flat next to us, and we have a former barber shop, which is now a studio apartment behind us. We have had some terrible tenants over the years, and we've had some excellent tenants. At the moment, we have some of the best tenants we've ever had. We hope they never leave. We've kept our rents down year after year as our costs have gone up year after year. We are exemplars, if there's such a thing, of organically occurring affordable housing. I noticed that the committee apparently in this draft has dropped the exemption for 6 or fewer units for just cause. I would like you individually, each of you, to consider the situation of a landlord like ourselves when we rent to an extremely disruptive, perhaps mentally ill tenant. And this has happened, who makes spurious police reports, threatens spurious legal actions, and is disruptive to ourselves and other tenants in many ways. We live cheek and jowl with them. We have to see them. We have to hear them. We have to put up with their harassment and their misbehavior along with the tenants. This is an entirely different situation from somebody who runs a large management company who has a staff to deal with these kinds of problems. We have to deal with them personally as best we can with limited resources. And it may be special pleading on my part for small landlords like ourselves, but I would really like you to carefully consider reinserting the 6 units or smaller exemption from just cause. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Next, we have William Bridges.
This is going to take longer than 2 minutes, so I'm going to give you
Oh,
the
okay.
unexpert.
Right, okay.
Get a break for
Okay.
My remarks tonight are about an important but limited aspect of the proposed revision. And my concern, like the previous gentleman, has to do with the scope of the proposal and to suggest an important addition to the list of exclusions. Namely, the proposal should exempt owner-occupied properties with a small number of co-residential tenants. For the past 39 years, my wife and I have been the owners of a property that has two separate residential structures, house in the front where we live and a house at the back that has been continuously rented during that period. In current parlance, the smaller house would be labeled an ADU, accessory dwelling unit. Over approximately 20 or more renters in those 39, there have been only a small handful of important instances in which we have had to opt for a non-renewable. I want to echo what was just said. Any sensible municipal policy must recognize one important principle. Not all landlord-tenant relationships fit into a one-size-fits-all box. Situations like ours and his require substantial degrees of cooperation, flexibility, and goodwill that are more than where an absentee landlord manages dozens or even scores of tenants. I can give a couple examples. The time is running out here, but there are bad outcomes when cooperative relationships fail. I think those were alluded to a moment ago. There's other examples that are laid out in my written testimony. I urge the committee to recommend an exemption for people in our situation, and I have passed out language from the San Diego municipality ordinance of this type, which does exactly that kind of exemption. Thank you for your time, plus the extra 15 minutes.
Thank you.
Next, we have Mary D. Sluber.
I'm here, but I haven't submitted it to.
Okay, that's fine. Lisa Pildes.
Hi, Lisa Pildes, lived in Evanston for about 50 years, been a landlord, excuse me, for over 15 years. I own property. I manage it myself. I own property in the 1st, 5th, 6th, and 7th wards. I've taken only one little part of it because I certainly agree with everybody else here, but there's a part that you may not have thought about. First of all, when a landlord decides not to renew a lease or offers to renew a lease for a rent amount that the current tenant does not want to pay, this is not an eviction. Please look in the dictionary and stop using these non-renewal and eviction terms interchangeably. By giving current tenants the right to renew a lease only 30 days before expiration, the draft ordinance would disrupt and artificially shorten the rental market period all over town, and especially downtown and in the areas where NU students live. In the case of undergraduate students, current sophomores have been looking for housing for their junior and senior years since last summer. I'm all rented up for next year. You cannot expect literally thousands of out-of-town students to make a special trip into Evanston only 3 to 4 weeks before school starts to look for an apartment. Even graduate students, and especially ones with school-aged children, are looking at the very least 3 to 4 months before school starts. In the memo to your committee, staff said finding a safe, affordable, accessible apartment may take an average of 3 months for any tenant and possibly even longer for tenants who are low income or have an eviction history. How can they do this when apartments can only come on the market at least at most 30 days before they're available? Although it does not jibe with your perfect world, being a small landlord is a business. You're putting unacceptable stumbling blocks in the way of those of us who are trying to make a living by offering rental properties at rental rates that reflect cost of operations plus a reasonable profit, just like any business. Do you think the tenants will get a better deal from some anonymous owner in another state or country? I get calls and emails several times a week from them who want to buy my properties. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you.
Next, we have Deborah Ritchie. I have somebody else next. I'm not sure I can read, Graham Shelby. I don't know if you're able to read that,
This name?
this name.
The last name is Shelley, M. Shelley. I would have read it as Ava M. Shelley, not Graham.
Okay.
We're both wrong.
Fazell.
Do you have a comment? Oh, okay.
Maybe we can just ask folks to raise their hand if,
Right. We have two more, Ann and Bernie Janet.
we have one in the back, Helen Show.
No, it was just signing it.
It was signing in, yes. You don't need to, you can if you,
You're
You're
already there.
welcome to speak, yes.
Now.
can I get your name? Can I just confirm your name?
My name is Ann Jeanette.
Thank
I've
you.
lived in Evanston, seems like 150 years, maybe it's only 65. But anyway, I've moved from a house to the Avador because of stairs and all those issues. And it's been wonderful there. There's a good feeling of community. I like our apartment. It's sunny and bright and all that. But this thing that other people have spoken to is causing a real feeling of unrest and disturbance there. And people that I know and like have been told no more leases. And we can't figure out why. They can't figure out why. And that just seems terribly unfair to me. I don't think that some of the people that have spoken from the landlord's point of view are addressing the fact this just cause. It's just that you have to give a reason. You can put people out, but they need to know a reason, I think. Otherwise, it just seems really weird. And I wasn't planning to speak, but thank you for letting me do so.
Thank you.
And I saw Helen Show in the back. I'm just noting that we have someone for public comment.
Thank you for your time and the opportunity to speak. My name is Helen Show, and about 20 years ago, I first came to Evanston to attend Northwestern University as an undergraduate student. I returned to Evanston last year as a visiting assistant professor in the Asian American Studies program. For the last few months, I've been serving as a tenant advocate on the Just Cause Task Force. During that time, I've had the chance to share my own story of non-renewal and hear stories from other tenants that have faced no-fault evictions. What is striking about all of these stories is the human toll that housing instability takes. It is easy to reduce the issue of non-renewal and eviction down to numbers or to make the claim that the problem is just a few bad apple landlords. But what we should consider are the very real and human effects that housing instability and displacement have on the folks experiencing them. Right now, when a housing provider issues a non-renewal or no-fault eviction, the burden of displacement falls solely on the tenant. Even when the tenant has done, quote, everything right, they are faced with the onerous task of making sure there is no gap between the lease for their current home and the next one. They must take on the time-consuming task of finding a new place to live. In a competitive housing market like Evanston's, it is no easy task to find a place where they can commute to work, and if they have kids, stay in the same school district, as well as find a similar-sized unit charging a similar amount of rent. This often requires taking time off of work, being placed on wait lists, and staying up at night worrying about what happens if their rental application is not picked. In addition, they have to pack up their belongings, another time-consuming and difficult task that requires spending a significant amount of money to have someone else pack up for them, or to go through the process of collecting boxes and packing material, organizing, sorting, packing up their belongings. And that's even before the actual process of moving, renting a truck, gathering friends and family, or hiring movers at substantial cost. This still does not take into account the security deposit or move-in fee that tenants have to pay their new housing provider even before they receive their security deposit back from their previous rental. On the task force, we've discussed at length the idea that housing, like many other services, is a business, and the housing provider-tenant relationship is one governed by a contract. What sets the business of housing apart from others is that unlike renting a car or being served at a restaurant, arbitrarily ending a housing rental agreement has profound effects on the tenant. What I just described is the burden a tenant faces in a best case scenario, non-renewal or eviction, when the tenant has the time and resources to find a new place to live, pay the security deposit and move. In less ideal circumstances, there are many well-documented harms associated with housing loss, ranging from involuntary job loss to incurring debt or losing access to credit and poor health and depression. Housing also requires navigating the power imbalance between housing providers and tenants. When I was looking for a new place to live, I was told by a property manager that they only sign 1-year leases in case the person is a problem tenant. When I asked what they meant, they clarified that a problem tenant is a tenant that asks for too many repairs. A reminder that in order to be perceived as a good tenant and not face non-renewal, I may have to forego necessary repairs. I'm almost done, I'm sorry. In all cases of non-renewal or no-fault eviction, the tenant is asked to bear the burden on their time, energy, mental health, and finances. Tonight, as the Housing and Development Committee considers the Just Cause Ordinance, I urge the committee members to consider its original intent. Just Cause is designed to prevent housing instability and displacement, not to unfairly punish housing providers. It is a way to recognize the important role that housing plays in our community. By supporting Just Cause, we can take one step toward building a community in Evanston that is committed to the stability and well-being of all its members. Thank you again for your time. Sorry for going over.
Okay, thank you.
Chair.
Is that,
Sure. I mentioned this earlier, but I'd like to repeat the request. Eric Bissett, Helen is task force member, Eric is a task force member. He was told that he could participate virtually. I think instead of him speaking during the committee's time to discuss, I think during public comment is the appropriate place.
okay, I thought they were going to be available for questions. I didn't know they.
I think they still will be, but I think he has public comment.
Yeah, if Eric has a public comment.
Unmute.
You should be able to speak.
Okay, now I can hear. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I'm Eric Passett, and as most people know, I've been a landlord in Evanston for a long time. And as you know, I served on the committee. Not that I agree with the Just Cause at all, but I figured, I want to be a part of it. If for some reason it passes, I feel like, the landlord's been heard. However, what I've been what I really feel is like it's going to be very counterproductive if you discourage the local landlords for being basically. I know one owner in particular that's thinking about selling their building because they're just sick and tired of constantly being, let's say, the law is getting tougher and tougher and tougher. And all the things I heard about what happened at the Avidor, I guarantee you have happened. I won't argue that. However, again, I've been a landlord for a long time. I've talked to other landlords who've been a long time, and we don't just not renew people for no reason. There has to be a very good reason. If they damaged our property, they've been disruptive, or they haven't paid rent. That's it. And it's very cut and dry. There's no reason. And the more restrictions you put on it, the more people like us don't want to be landlords. And if you force us out of the business, all you have is large landlords, let's say hedge funds and people who aren't tied to community being landlords in Evanston, and they'll be completely counterproductive. And I just think, I think something needs to be done. I just don't think this is it. I do feel for the tenants that have been unfairly treated totally. I just don't think this is the way to handle. I think we should go back to the drawing board and find another way, personally. No,
Okay, thank you. Thanks very much. So is that everyone who wanted? Yes, one more hand in the back.
Can you state your name?
Yeah, Mary Rosinski. I thought I'd signed up online, but something must have gone wrong. But I think, like the person before me said, something probably needs to happen. What's ever happening at the Avidor is a huge problem. But I've been a landlord for 33 years, and I've been a realtor for the 40 years, and have sold many small people, I mean, small investments to people who are in it. And when you do something like this and you penalize the housing provider, you will discourage those people who are giving better rent per square foot than in the new big things like the Avador and the Central Street and the EU2 or whatever, because those are those are pension fund things. Those are investment. They don't really care about you. Your smaller landlords, they usually live close by or they live in Evanston. And I did a study back in 2020, and I'm happy to do it for you all again now, where I compared existing square footage of, properties that were older than 25 years versus newer one. And the older properties were 20 to 40% less per square foot. So if you start making it really difficult, these are people like myself who, if my tenant doesn't pay his rent, I still have to pay you 10% if I'm late on my water. The assessor wants his money. The mortgage company wants to charge stuff. So you don't want to indirectly hurt the people that are helping provide somewhat affordable housing by having them lose their building. And I know a lot of the people I've sold two to three units to are first-time buyers who use the rent to help them get a foot in the market. They don't want to exploit anybody. And so, like, I have a client right now who has a tenant who just decided he wasn't going to pay rent for the last 3 months. And so she's going to have to pay attorney fees. She's got her mortgage. She's got her taxes. So think very carefully. Maybe the city could help people more. Because I know we had talked one point, I just want to say this last thing, housing is a right, but it's not the responsibility only of housing providers that are not city sponsored or anything. So thank you so much for your time. Please move cautiously.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Is there would you like to make a comment as well in the back? No, okay. Then I think, whoops, one more hand.
I'm not quite sure what's going on. There have been some statements that were.
Would you like to come to the microphone so we can hear you?
There was.
And we'll need your name as well for the record.
Yes, for Mary D. Sluber. There were some statements that were submitted online. And I thought that those were going to be read here at the meeting.
The committee has all received those and we've read them. So.
Okay, so they're not going to be read at the meeting.
No, we'd be here a long time.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
They're sent in advance to the committee, and then anything that doesn't get received between the time it's sent and the time of the committee gets sent again. So the committee receives every single written comment.
And you don't have copies of them here, do you, by any chance? I mean, I had sent one and I thought it was going to be read here and I didn't know I was going to be here.
Right.
So, but I don't have a copy with me. So
Yeah.
I just was wondering if you had my copy.
Well,
or not.
we received them all by email, so I don't have
Okay.
a hard copy.
Okay, well, could I just say a couple of points?
Sure, go right
Very
ahead.
brief. I wanted to say that I agree with some of the points that were made in the gentleman that spoke to us from wherever. I would ask you to consider the plight of the smaller landlord. In that I've owned here in Evanston for almost 50 years, and I've been a landlord for that long of a time. My average tenant in a 2-flat stays 6 to 7 years. My current tenants have both been there 8 years right now. I haven't raised my rent in 8 years until recently. I'm very cautious about it. I'm close to a lot of my tenants. That's what happens when you're a small landlord. You use your savings to buy your place. You do the maintenance, you talk with your tenants a lot. I know we hear these horror stories, but I want to tell you that these are not typical. And my great fear is that here in Evanston, having been around so long, can be an advantage and a disadvantage, as we all know. The advantage I have is I've seen Evanston change a lot. And I've seen fewer and fewer small landlords being replaced by many more large landlords. And as other people have addressed the issue, those people that are the large institutional landlords, and I'm not saying that we should hit them over the head necessarily, but because they're building new units, high rises and such, their rents can often be twice ours for the same square footage. So I just ask you to consider the plight of the small landlord, and that's about all I have to say. Thank you.
Yep, thank you. All right. I think now we're ready to get on with the rest of our agenda. So the first item is we have minutes to approve from our meeting of September 19th. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
And a second?
Second.
Does anybody have any corrections, comments? Not used to looking at my night loads here. Okay, then, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. Okay. And then, with your indulgence, I'm going to switch the order of business, and just so we can hear, the one-stop shop housing update. Bob?
Yes, we have Bob Dean from Center for Neighborhood Technology that is here to speak about this program. And Bob, I believe you also have Ava Shelby.
Yes, Ava Shelby is also here. I was going to point to her, but she could come up here too. Yeah, so thank you first for rearranging the agenda. We're going to take you away from Just Cause for about 3 minutes
Okay.
for a brief update, but then we'll let you get back to it. So my name is Bob Dean. I'm the Chief Strategy Officer at Center for Neighborhood Technology, and I'm joined by Ava Shelby, who's the new Managing Director at the Evanston Development Cooperative. And we wanted to give you a brief update on the Green Homes Pilot Program. We introduced this to you last year, updated you in April, and we're going to be here every 6 months with updates on how the program is going. The basic summary points of the program are on this slide. It was co-designed and now is co-led by EDC, the Evanston Development Cooperative, as well as the Center for Neighborhood Technology and Elevate Energy. And the point of it is to make energy efficiency and healthy homes improvements in existing affordable housing in Evanston while also preserving affordability. There are both geographic and income limitations. We've talked about these before in areas with concentrations of affordable housing, and there's income qualification required as well for people to participate. The pilot is funded with $1 million in COVID relief funding from what's called the state and local fiscal recovery funds. So it's distinguished from other housing programs in mainly two ways. That one, it funds a range of different improvements. You can see them listed here, the types of things that could be put in. And second, the goal of this is to help participants qualify for other housing programs as well. So the pilot will be conducting full home assessments in affordable housing and then helping to find funding sources, whether it's the $1 million that has been contributed already or ideally other programs as well that exist for complementary purposes. Thank you. So we know obviously that $1 million is a drop in the bucket in the housing needs of Evanston. So the goals are first to show this kind of approach works in terms of doing home assessments and helping participants get to other funding sources. And second, we also want to make the program as centered on a participant experience as possible to make this a good experience for those going through it. Our target metrics are shown here. The building numbers are targets. This may vary some based on the cost of improvements, but we do expect to achieve sizable energy savings as well as cost savings in any unit that we work in. Preserving affordability, of course, is also a major goal. And then a big one is also leveraging outside funding, bringing in more resources for home improvements in affordable housing in Evanston. We had a recent win in this regard. EDC and C&T won a national competition through the Department of Energy called the Buildings Upgrade Prize. It's $400,000, and that will go to EDC to be used to build their capacity to manage the program now and also continue to manage programs like this into the future. Our recent progress on the final slide here is as follows. We soft launched this over the summer with a flyer shown here. There's also an online application that was used to get a couple of initial residents in the door. We submitted a number of grant applications, including the one I just mentioned, but also a lot of them to the federal government focused more on the capital side. We also finalized program design, and that was particularly in light of shifting requirements from the Department of Treasury about how they expected housing programs funded with COVID relief funding to be operated. We are using the funding in an innovative way, and we wanted to make sure we were playing within the rules. And so we did research at other parts of the country who would use the funding in similar ways that we were expecting to. And now we understand what the rules are, and we're moving forward with confidence on how we've designed the program. And most importantly, our lead partner, the Evanston Development Cooperative, went through a leadership transition. Robbie Marcus, the previous general manager, received a Fulbright scholarship and is now in South America doing very interesting research. So now Ava Shelby, the new general manager, is on board. So we have not gotten into the construction phase of the program yet. One of our real goals is to build EDC's capacity to be the leader of this program in the long term, to always be an Evanston-centered organization that has expertise in launching these types of programs. So we deliberately slowed the construction work until a new leader was in place, but now we are positioned to move forward on that in the coming months. Do you want to say a couple words about yourself, Ava, since you're the new person at EDC and many of these people know EDC from the past?
Yeah, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm happy to be here, and my focus will be in low income housing. One of my associates, we talk about this almost every day. I'm happy to be here again. I have some experience. I actually flipped a house here in Evanston, 1314 Florence. It was a big undertaking. Oh my goodness. I have a background in building. My father was a contractor. So as a child, I was on site many times watching him, asking questions, and just kind of fell in love with it, mostly the creative side of it. I'm happy to be here. I am excited about our future plans. And I'm looking forward to being an integral part of this meeting going forward, so I can also give you updates and be aware of what's going on in the community. So, and I thank you.
Great. Thank you.
Are there any questions?
Yeah, committee, any questions? Yes.
Thanks for coming. This has been helpful. A few quick questions. I was wondering how many folks are currently found to be eligible, and also like when do you guys expect actual breaking ground on some of these projects at these homes?
Yeah, we've had a number of people sign up, most of whom are eligible. We have a handful, maybe 6 or 7 individuals so far. We have not gotten very far with the building assessments. We really wanted to have EDC be able to lead that process. So we expect to start that soon. I think Ava's about 2 weeks on the job. So we are in the very earliest stages of new leadership there. But I would expect construction, once we do the assessments, is not too far behind. So I would say by the time we talk to you in April, we expect to have some work underway. I don't know if anything will be completed yet.
Okay, awesome. And I think I made this plug back in April. There was a lot of Ninth Ward residents who were interested in the program, and because of restrictions weren't eligible. But I think there's a desire from a lot of homeowners to make these type of changes, and they just don't know what to do. So having like the Evanston playbook for, having a green home would be fantastic. I think also building capacity. I think it's exciting that we can build capacity here with like local contractors and local craftsmen to do this work. So really excited to see where this goes.
Yeah. I appreciate that comment. I know you've made that comment before, and I do agree. After we get a couple of the affordable ones under our belt, this could be the kind of service that's offered as a contract to people who are not affordable housing residents but still want to take advantage of the expertise. But yep, thank you.
Councilmember Reed, is that your light?
Yes. The Burns light. Quick question. I'm sorry. I was reading for a second, so I may have blanked and missed it, but how many folks have we assisted thus, or have you all assisted thus far?
We haven't done any construction yet. We've got about 6 come in who are interested. But again, we've kind of paused the work until we had full staffing at EDC to really begin it in full. But we would love your help. One of the eligible geographies is the eastern part of the 8th Ward. And so coming up pretty soon, we'd love to be able to use you to get the word out to residents in that geography.
Certainly.
Cool.
Thank you. I have one more question for you. Thank you for being here also. Just as a side note, my neighbor used to be Stephen Perkins. We have Stephen Perkins Way on my block from CNT. If one needs to get information about guidelines of houses or properties that qualify, and also the personal qualifications for your program, where do we go?
Yeah, the best place to go, we have a website, and so I'll say it now, but I can also ask Marianne to send this around to the committee. It's greenhomes.cnt.org. Greenhomes is all one word. So that's greenhomes, just one word, .cnt.org. And yeah, if you go to that, you can enter in an address. It tells you whether or not it's eligible, and then it tells you what the income qualifications are as well. Certainly.
Yeah, and I think I'm seeing my answer on the one slide up, which is multi-family units, multi-tenant tenant units are eligible for this?
Yeah, this can be any type of unit, single family home, 2-flat, or as multifamily. Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Okay, well, this is all really, it's a great program and we're really excited to see it really get launched with some construction happening, and we'll look forward to your update in 6 months.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so now we're ready to begin our discussion of a voluminous draft amendment of our residential landlord tenant ordinance, and which includes, of course, the just cause eviction provisions. And before we get into that, I want to just say to Lindsay, just an amazing, the memo was so amazing. The detail that went into putting together the draft amendment for us, I think, was phenomenal work. And so really appreciate your getting this all together for us for tonight. Do you want to say any introductory words?
I think Liz is going to kick us off.
Okay.
And I want to move this for discussion, but two, I also want to echo that I think all of the folks who are on the Just Cause Committee would, I think we saw even closer the work that went into this, and really appreciate Lindsay and Liz that they made the process so smooth that we are here today with something to present to you all.
Right. Well, and we appreciate the work of the task force, because you had we met regularly.
We met every week for the last 2 months.
Yeah, right. So a lot of work has gone into getting us ready for the discussion. So you've made a motion?
Yes.
Motion that we discuss this item. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Okay. So we have a hard copy here. Yes, Councilmember Heracottis.
Okay, I'll start. Start discussion. Do you want to direct?
Well,
I'll let staff talk first.
Well, I was thinking that we would just work our way through it. And
like box by box.
Oh, do you have okay? Sure. Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, of course.
So just quickly before we get started on the discussion, staff received a request from North Suburban Housing Providers to provide a quick overview presentation. This is in response to a presentation that the committee received in July from Open Communities, MTO, and LCBH. So they requested time to be able to provide from the landlord perspective some information for the committee's consideration. In addition, we'd like if Councilmember Reed could provide an overview of the Just Cause Task Force, just so committee members that were not involved in that have an understanding of what went on at the task force proceedings. And then I think it would be appropriate to walk through the draft changes. Staff is prepared to walk through those, but if you want to call out specific items you'd like to discuss in more detail, we're happy to accommodate it in that fashion rather than walking through them individually, because there are 47 different changes. Thank you. And your presentation is up.
Oh, can you hear me? Hi, my name is Aaron Bornstein. I'm the board member on the North Shore Housing Providers. We are a group of real estate professionals here in Evanston. We collectively own and manage hundreds of units in Evanston, as well as throughout the North Shore. So when we talk about amending an RLTO, this is a big task, and this is something that should be done seriously. And it should take into account all stakeholders. So it needs to be a balanced approach. Evanston has something like 40 to 50,000 tenants. Of those, the numbers we're seeing, 100, 120 a year wind up in eviction. It sounds like there's an issue at the Avador. Obviously, there are going to be some issues, but we don't want to throw out the positive work that our current system does over the vast and overwhelming amount of people, just because there are a handful of problems. Those should be addressed. There's always room for improvement, but let's not throw out the baby with the bathwater on something that works for 99% of the people. So the other comment I want to get into before we get into it is, I agree, housing is a human rights issue. This is not just an economic arrangement between landlord and tenant, although it is certainly that. What What we have a responsibility as landlords is to provide quality housing. We want to do right by our tenants because that's how we make money. That's how they renew their leases. That's how we keep them along. And so in order to do that, if we have a tenant that's causing there to be vermin in the building, cockroaches, rats, whatever the situation is, we have a responsibility to move that person out. If there's drug dealing going on in the building, again, that falls on the housing provider's shoes. And we are expected and we want to do this. We want to provide quality housing. We want to be proud of our work and we want to be able to provide something for our tenants that's a good product. And so just cause creates an unethical situation for us. We are required to keep in tenants who are hoarders, who are partiers, who are drug dealers, someone who violates the stock order. I was going to say, I'm having I'm speaking now.
I'm a committee member. Point of order, Chair. I don't know if it's appropriate to have a presentation with this much misleading information. You're not speaking in fact about what this ordinance does, and this is an inappropriate presentation from what should be an expert witness. You are completely mischaracterizing what this ordinance does.
I was going to say, may I continue now? Thank you. So again, and Alderman Reed and I have gotten into this on multiple occasions. Well, maybe not multiple times, once or twice at least. We've gotten into this, and his point is: look, if you're drug dealing in the building, if there's someone who's bringing in rats or cockroaches, the ordinance allows you to get them out. And so, what are you getting so worked up about, Aaron? And my point is absolutely not. If you read the ordinance, there is no effective way to do that. So this is an important point. This is really the key point to our dispute. And why don't we go through the language here and take a look? So if we go to the next slide, if we look at section 5-3-6-1, this is the enforcement structure. This is where it tells you what happens. So as a housing provider, you've got a tenant, they're violating the rental agreement, however that is. They're not paying the rent, they're dealing drugs, they're doing whatever they're doing. So then the housing provider is required to serve them with a 10-day notice. The 10-day notice says this is your misconduct. You have 10 days to clean it up and fix it. At the end of the 10 days, if they've cleaned it up, great. If they haven't cleaned it up, then the landlord must go to court and they start an eviction lawsuit. And so then at some point in time, either they get evicted or they resolve the matter. And when they resolve the matter, and this is the key point, then once the landlord accepts the rent or the landlord doesn't move forward in 30 days, then whatever the violation was, that's withdrawn. And that's then closed and the process starts over. So then the practical effect of this, and this is what I call the endless circle of misconduct that this ordinance allows tenants to get away with. So on the left-hand side, you can see this is what happens in a rent situation. So, and the problem here is there's no cumulative action. There's no awareness of what happens for the tenant who doesn't make a mistake once, but makes that mistake repeatedly. So they come in, they're late on their rent. We serve them with notice. Eventually they make payment. They come current, and then the cycle starts again. They can then be late again. And we are required then to renew their lease. As long as they are current at the moment that renewal is happening, then they have a right to get their lease renewed. And the landlord cannot say, hey, you've been late. You've been late 12 months. I had to take you to court 3 times. I'm not renting to you. You can't afford my unit. You no longer have that right as a landlord. Similarly, if we look on the right-hand side, this is section 5-3-6-2C. It's a similar process on tenant misconduct. So let's say your tenant is drug dealing. You have indisputable video evidence of people coming to his unit at odd hours, being there for 5 minutes and leaving at 2 a.m. And this happens repeatedly. And you have evidence of them dealing drugs. You know they're dealing drugs. They're getting complaints. You serve them with your 10-day notice. Stop dealing at my unit. Otherwise, I'm going to evict you. For 9 days, they can continue to deal. On that 10th day, they stop. That's it. They've now cured the violation. And that violation, they have to be on their good behavior then until you collect the next payment of rent or until 30 days expires. At that point in time, they have wiped clean their record. And if they start dealing again, you now have to re-get the evidence. You have to re-serve them with the notice and you have to put it down. This is the way the ordinance is drafted. This is really bad. And so these are bad things and this needs to be improved. If we then go to my next slide. How has this changed? So under the current system, before we would consider any of these changes, so a housing provider has the authority to non-renew without going to court. So if I know you're dealing drugs, if I know you got a cat in that unit, this is a no pet building. If I know you're smoking in that unit because I'm getting constant complaints and the person above you says I have asthma and it's aggravating it and I can't breathe. If I know this, I say, look, I'm sorry. I've done this with you 3 times. You don't listen to me. You're not following the rules. I'm not renewing your lease. I no longer have that authority. Again, the only right that I have is at the moment of renewal, then I can say, okay, you're in violation. But if they've cured that violation, I can't do anything. They have the right. They have the automatic right to live there as long as they would like, or until the next renewal period where again, they must cure it. So I think this is unethical. I think this places us in a terrible position. The tenant can, so again, what happens? What happens when I say, all right, I'm fed up with you. You have broken my rules. You're dealing drugs. I don't care. I'm not going to rent my unit to you anymore. You're non-renewed. So now we go to court. The tenant says, no, you don't have the right to do that. I'm a good person. You can't kick me out. We go to court. So now if the housing provider is wrong, if we get to court and the housing provider says, gee, I just had the cat over that one day and you know, my girlfriend broke up with me. I lost my job. I just needed my pet. Whatever their excuse is, the judge has a soft place in their heart. They hate to see someone put out, and they decide the tenant is right and it's too harsh to put someone out over this violation. They disagree with me. Not only do they get to stay, but under the language of section 5-3-6-3B, the landlord is then responsible for paying this person 6 months rent plus attorney's fees plus court costs. If, on the other hand, I go there, I prove to the judge's satisfaction, yes, this person's dealing drugs, this person had a pet, whatever my issue is, I prove it, there's no penalty for the tenant. I mean, they have to move out, but there's no financial penalty. This is the one-sided nature of this ordinance that's been drafted. So, why do I dislike this ordinance? It is bad for tenants. This is, again, I think it's unethical. I think it is inappropriate for someone to force the good tenant to live under these conditions. I think it's unethical for the good tenant to be forced to move out, and the bad tenant who's breaking the rules gets to stay. I think it's bad for housing providers. Again, we get one tenant in the building. If it's a 6-unit building, a 10-unit building, half your tenants move out, all your tenants move out. Who wants to live in a building with drug dealing? If you live in a building, a non-pet building, because you have asthma or you have some kind of cat allergy, and you're forced out of your home. And then if enough tenants do it, then where is the landlord's? How can they run a business if they cannot even enforce these basic rules? So what's going to happen? And you've heard many other people speak on this. They're going to divest from Evanston. They're going to go to a different community where they are not fighting City Hall. They are not fighting these type of onerous regulations. You can go to Evanston, go to Skokie, you can go to Wilmette, you can go to Chicago. You don't have to deal with this. And so that brings me to my next slide, the effects on real estate. We can disagree on many things. I'm sure we're going to have it. One thing I think we have to agree on is the real estate community hates this ordinance. We think it is going to be terrible for our business. Maybe we're wrong. Maybe it's not as bad as we say, but as long as we hate it, if we don't invest here, that's not good for anyone. Housing stock is already in short supply in Evanston. Alderman Reed and I, again, we got into it one time. I said, you will make Evanston uninvestable. And you came back to me and you said, I want to make Evanston the most livable place in the city, the country, whatever your argument was. And I think you had a point there. But I would respond, how livable will Evanston be if the private sector won't invest in it? And so you need us. We need to work together. And this ordinance does not do that. Finally, if we get off just cause for a moment, there are a number of other things in here that I think I want to flag for you. I'll run through these quickly. So the first is the right of first refusal. Again, I didn't realize this on some of my prior comments. I know that committee member Hugo and Joanne had flagged this one. This one's really bad. Again, it means if you have a rental unit, you have to wait 90 days before you can sell the unit. What do you do on the 2-flat that's owner occupied? This is just a delay. There's no obvious benefit. If a person's a tenant, they cannot buy a 10-unit apartment building. That's not a serious thing. And so you put this delay in there that it stops real estate from moving forward. It's going to stop further development. It's going to stop that pipeline. Not a good idea. Then the next item we have is the unlawful clauses that we have. So this is section 5-3-10-4. So here the ordinance provides a penalty on landlords if they do a 15% rent increase. Illinois state law, it's prohibited by the Illinois Rent Control Preemption Act of 1997. The site is there. Again, the language, I don't want to get into the legalese, is home rule unit may not regulate or control the amount of rent charge. This clause violates it on its face. This is being looked at by attorneys. If Evanston wants to get a lawsuit for these type of changes, this is a path that's going to happen if they proceed to force this RLTO changes through. And then again, reading this ordinance as a landlord, I mean, it's just a poke in the eye. There are so many new fees, new causes of action, new requirements on landlords. Again, I flag a few of these. Landlord fines are doubled, more than doubled, from $200 to $500 in section 5-3-6-2E. What was the reason for that? Is there some violation going on? You just wanted more money from us? Tenant recovers 1 month of rent for rent or actual damages, a new fine in 5-3-10-3. Tenants can countersue a housing provider for 6 months rent, plus attorney fees, plus court fees. Again, 6 months rent. You rent to someone, there's a problem, they get 6 months rent out of you. Plus attorney costs, plus attorney's fees, just makes it uninvestable. So in conclusion, I urge you in the strongest possible terms to vote no on this ordinance. I suppose you could send it back down to the task force to ask them to do more. I don't think that task force was a very balanced entity. I think the chair is the most ideological person on the committee, with all due respect. I think that he handpicked the members of that. He got 2 people who ideologically are very similar to him. And so this is just not something that takes into any perspective other than Alderman Reed. He's a smart man. He can push his stuff through. He speaks eloquently. I'm very impressed with him on a personal level. Politically, we do not agree, and I do not think it is a wise choice to allow him to dominate in this fashion. The current RLTO, please. The amount of the RLTO, I urge you to vote no on just cause. I vote no on the RLTO. It's bad for tenants. It's bad for housing buyers, and it will be bad policy for Evanston.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for your time.
All right, so. So Councilmember Reed, did you want to summarize what the work of the task force? Oops.
Oh, Chair, I would say that this group has had already 13 minutes, and typically we don't
Right.
allow this much time for.
How long are your thoughts?
3 minutes.
Hmm?
3 minutes.
Okay.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity to speak. My name is Dan Skirmahorn, by the way. I am a member of the North Shore Housing Providers, but I also have been a real estate management operator in Evanston for over 40 years. And looking at this proposed changes to the ordinance, I look back to the objectives of this committee, which are to develop vibrant, welcoming, and sustainable neighborhoods, improve housing, combat homelessness, maintain and expand housing affordability and desire diversity, work with and support local businesses and job creation, and revitalize the public spaces, parks, community centers, et cetera. Laudable goals, no question about it. I'd like to talk about a couple of those goals and how they relate to these proposed changes. You talk about maintaining and expanding housing affordability and diversity, but instituting relocation fees will cause rents to go up significantly. If you look at the value of a year lease and find out that at the end of it, you'd have to give back 25% or 3 months to a tenant who's moving out, what is the landlord going to do to compensate for that eventuality? They're going to raise rents. And tenants who might otherwise act appropriately when their lease expires and move out will probably look for ways to collect that 3 months of rent. Again, it's going to cause rents to increase. Precluding housing providers from collecting reasonable late fees will cause a greater level of delinquency. If a tenant's rent is $2,000 a month, a late fee of $50 is 2.5%. By contrast, the city charges 10% if you're late on your water bill. Your lender charges 5% typically if you're late on your mortgage payment. Why should the housing provider not be able to collect an equivalent late fee when they need those funds to pay the water bill and the mortgage and the taxes, et cetera? These are going to cause rents to go up. Providing an opportunity for a tenant to collect legal fees if they prevail in a lawsuit against a housing provider, but not providing the same for the housing provider is probably unconstitutional, but at the very least, certainly unfair. This means that housing providers will have to incorporate these legal defense costs into their rents, which again will make housing rates go up. The result is you've got about 98% of tenants who are good tenants who go through the life of their lease without any problem with the landlord or vice versa. But yet you have 2% that are bad tenants for whatever reason, whether it's not paying rent, not living up to the requirements of the lease, or not following the social contract of being a good neighbor in a multifamily environment. So how are we improving the goal there of maintaining a diverse and affordable housing stock if we've just caused rents to go up to the landlords because of these changes? You talk about supporting local businesses and creating jobs. We just at Skirmore & Company support over 80 vendors who are Evanston-based companies. We employ approximately one full-time person for every 60 units that we manage. We do business with every hardware store in town, and we are the number one or the number two spender at Evanston's Home Depot every single month, putting that money back into this community. With the rental properties that we manage, pay over $161,000 a year in water and sewer charges. And in 2022, we paid over $1 million in real estate taxes. So we support the local businesses and job creation in this town as the housing providers. And it's not just Skirmore & Company, it's all the housing providers. So again, what are we doing to help that situation as a goal for this committee by causing rents to go up? In short, you're basically protecting a small group of tenants who are the bad actors, who are not complying with the terms of the lease, whether it's pets, smoking, noise, etc. How are we going to build that case except for calling the police in the city every time one of these things comes up? So now we're going to be exhausting the resources of the city to build our case to go to court with, because we're not going to get the tenants around them to come to court and say that they're a problem, even though they complain to us that they are. They're not going to take off their day at work. But reality is, you've got in your packet on page 8, a report that says over the last year, the number of calls to the Metropolitan Tenants Organization have gone down 34% with regard to evictions. They've gone up 11% when it comes to wanting to get out of their lease early. What does this show us? Evictions is not the problem. Not being able to extend your lease is not the problem. The tenants want to get out of their lease sooner than a year. When we offer multiple year leases, most tenants turn them down because they want the flexibility of being able to move out within a year. So what are we trying to fix here? If the goals are to provide more affordable housing and a better housing stock with more diversity, why not provide incentives to the landlords of the existing property stock rather than penalties to comply? You're not going to be able to get enough affordable housing through the inclusionary housing ordinance and new construction. Certainly not now with the way the development world is with interest rates and the cost of building. But you've got this housing stock that has X number of units that if we could make more of those affordable, we might make some progress on the goal that this committee was set out to achieve. So I think the solution is to bring the housing providers to the table for a true discussion on how to achieve the goals of your committee, rather than throwing up the roadblocks and penalties that are just out there to protect a small portion of tenants who are bad actors. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So Councilmember Reed, you want to just tell us a bit about your work of your task force?
Yes, really excited about that. But I do first want to acknowledge that, look at the balance here. We gave housing providers quite a bit of time. They had 20 minutes to share their presentation, comparing Open Communities and the other groups who shared expert testimony to this is like saying that doctors or sharing information about healthcare or teachers sharing statistics about education is somehow advocacy. This is a bit different, and I'm a bit disappointed that we went down this route. But nonetheless, I do appreciate that we actually got some arguments laid out. First, I would say that this committee at our meeting in, I think, July, voted to create a short-term task force to come up with a just cause eviction ordinance. And we wanted to ensure that that task force was balanced. We had 2 housing providers on that committee. We had 2 folks who represent tenants, and we had an attorney who is a housing attorney and deals with this on a day-to-day basis. The committee was, I think, chosen in a very balanced way. I mean, Ugo is one of the members and was a vocal advocate. Eric Passett is not a is someone from your group. And so we were very intentional about making sure that we had a balanced committee with folks who represented truthfully their positions. And I think we chose a really good group. We met weekly on Fridays and went line by line through this ordinance to prepare what is in front of you today. I want to know if, am I just talking about the process?
We didn't go through the ordinance. We went through the just cause section of it and not all of it.
Of course, that we were the Just Cause Task Force. We went through the Just Cause.
I just wanted to clarify.
Right.
I think that was, can I talk about the actual ordinance or?
Well, why don't we, let me see if there are other things earlier in the draft, the big draft ordinance that the committee wants to talk about.
And if I can just as a suggestion for efficiency, as opposed to going line by line through everything, I'd just say if folks can pick out what
right.
they,
yeah, exactly. Yeah, a lot of the proposed amendments are just very straightforward. Yes, Ugo, are you next?
Yes, thank you. Maybe Lauren had her hand up first. Oops.
Oh, thank you.
Follow.
I just wanted a little clarity. It's already 8:15. We have yet to actually jump into this. I wanted to ask just if we had sort of specific portions we wanted to get through this evening, and if so, we could identify those.
I think given the interest in our audience, we certainly want to deal with the just cause eviction section, but that actually, it seemed to me there wasn't a whole lot before that part of the ordinance that is going to require a lot of discussion. But yeah, Ugo, are you?
Thank you very much. I actually disagree with that last statement from you in the sense that I think that this ordinance has not been given enough time. This originally was introduced by staff to us, and it was a revision of an existing ordinance in Evanston done by tenant advocacy organizations, which that obviously brings already an unbalance to the whole thing. So that needed to be addressed, and this is the first opportunity I get to say it. Obviously, we have issues on both sides that need to be protected. And my problem with the way we are now is that there is no balance. There is no balance achieved yet. The Just Cause Task Force was not balanced. It was 3-1, and it was not a voting issue. It was a push through an agenda that we didn't have enough time to discuss to get to the bottom of it. We don't have enough data information. Somebody says is 44% of the population is tenants, and then it throws that it's 41,000 or 44,000, 42,000 tenants in Evanston. We have a population of 77,000 and change. It's impossible that 41 or 44% is 41,000. So data is manipulated. We don't have real information from the city of Evanston in terms of how many properties are owner occupied, how many units are owned by landlords in the sense of, is this a small landlord or a big landlord? So there is a lot of what I'm trying to get to, and not to bore you with the detail, because I have very details, 5.3, 0.3, 0.3, 8.6, that is part of this ordinance that I have issues with still to this day. And I'm just half through it. And I have poured myself every free time I have of my own time to do this. And we have not discussed this to the point. We're trying to cast a net that is going to catch so much flippers, dolphins, turtles, everybody that we don't want to damage into this net just because we're casting a very wide net. And small landlords are going to be the most affected out of this. Owner occupants of their 2 flats or 3 flats or 6 flats, those will be impacted to a level that it's unheard of, really very bad. Somebody mentioned if my tenant is behind on their rent, and I am relying on that rent to pay my mortgage, the fee that I have to pay my mortgage holder is way much higher than that. The fees that we pay to the city if we're behind on payments are way higher than that. So and then the multiplying by times and times and times of probably the landlord didn't have the money to give it to the tenant within 21 days, even if they wanted to. And then past that, it's going to be 3 or 4 times that amount. Where is that landlord? I know so many people that rely on the income. That's their nest egg for the rest of their lives. And we're playing with that, and we're not giving it enough attention to the details. There is so much that needs to be clarified. And I totally agree that staff has done a phenomenal job of trying to compile everything that's being thrown at them by all the sides that come into play. But it's daunting. This is huge. And this is not the only thing the staff that is dealing with this deals with the city. They have probably a gazillion more things to tend to. So what I'm trying to apply is to please, let's give this more time. We need more time to discuss it.
So if I could just follow up with a question. So then you would like us to start at the beginning and go work our way through it? Or
well, I think that it needs to be addressed better and on a more balanced way. 3-2 is not a balanced way to me, especially when we have somebody who is very forceful, as Councilmember Reed is.
Yeah,
I appreciate that.
You're very welcome, sir.
Councilmember Heracars.
Sure. I have a couple of comments about Just Cause. First of all the folks from the Avador, I just want to applaud you for coming forward, because there is a huge power imbalance between the renters and, and it sounds like it is a bad situation there, and there's some retaliation possibly happening. And from what I've heard from, the other housing providers here, it sounds like everyone agrees that that's something you folks would not do, right? And so when you folks say, you're trying to protect bad actors, I really feel that those folks sitting on the other side of the room are not bad actors. So I think we all have to work together to get to the point where we can agree where this is workable, because what's happening there is obviously wrong. And I think all of you would agree, right? So looking at that, I think there's a lot of confusion around what a non-renewal looks like. I think, myself, you should have the right, if you have a bad tenant, to non-renew. It is different than an eviction. But it is a way of getting someone out of there. But you do need, and I don't want it to be onerous. There is reasons why the legal system has protections so that evictions are hard to do, right? So I think maybe staff can share some of the steps that would be allowable for a non-renewal in Just Cause, so that we have an understanding, so we're not jumping to conclusions over what it means.
Okay, that would be helpful, but yes. Yeah, Lauren.
Can I just follow up on that?
Sure.
While we're on the subject of sort of a potential sort of balancing what are clearly needs on both sides. When you talk about that, what some of these options might be, I would also be curious for an update on what's going on with Cook County's ordinance, because at the risk of sounding heretical, I have this gnawing question in my head, because I do agree that there is a risk of divestment. I don't know that I agree with the magnitude, but there is a risk of divestment if Evanston is a standout, is an unusually hard place to operate multifamily housing. And so I wonder, if Cook County is doing most of this, then Evanston becomes sort of part of the geography in a way where if we have significantly difficult, conservative, aggressive, whatever word you want to use, we are then standing out. So I would also be curious to know, because to me, that seems like another opportunity for some middle ground where we give some protections to tenants. I think the idea of a carve out for small landlords is a good one. I think you'd written the email about having someone running a business out of your unit and the exposure that put on you. I think the question of fees is an important one, but it's different potentially, which is why I was saying maybe we don't cover everything tonight. So I agree with this larger point by Juan of, I think we care about both sides of this equation, and I hope people know that.
Yeah, thanks, Lauren.
Sure.
Yeah, Councilmember Reed.
Yeah, thank you. I think this is a great opportunity to start discussing what the ordinance actually says and what it doesn't say, and where I've seen a lot of misconception. But before I do that, I do want to say there's a call to say that we need to slow this down. I can tell you, the just cause ordinance is one of the most discussed ordinances we will ever have before us, or we have had before us this term and likely in other terms. We spent a lot of time going through this. This is not the end. We're not voting on it today. We're spending even more time discussing it today. We're going to see it back at our next meeting or at a future meeting, and we'll discuss it more then. And so I think what is going to be helpful is when folks actually dig into the meat of the ordinance. Now, I appreciate some of the concerns that were brought up. So let's very quickly walk through this. Folks said, hey, if my tenant isn't paying rent, how will I deal with this? Well, the first cause for eviction is non-payment of rent. If your tenant isn't paying rent, they can be evicted. You can go through the court process. And I want to clear up that the idea that if someone doesn't pay rent and they pay rent within 10 days, well, one, that's just Evanston law already. You have to give them a 10-day notice and they have the right to remedy within 10 days. But outside of that, again, the Section 1 non-payment of rent is not tied to Section 2 material non-compliance. So the concerns that you raised about the 30 days and it does not apply to non-payment of rent. Am I incorrect on that? I'm seeing faces there. Where am I seeing that?
So the concern.
I'm sorry, I'm seeing faces from the.
I think those of us who are not well versed in this whole area would like to know if, and I don't know if this is staff to tell us what is the current process when someone's lease is not being renewed and over their, because they're not been paying rent or something. What, as Councilmember Harakaris asked, so what is the current process and how would it be different with the?
There would be no difference. If someone isn't paying rent, the housing provider has the right to take them to court.
So they have to go to court?
No.
Yes. Or if you could non-renew.
Okay, so
Can I
maybe,
add
maybe we should have
something?
staff walk us through like current policy, proposed changes as if we're sixth graders, short and sweet. Just to simplify the conversation,
right?
Sure. So
that's my request.
I have prepared a discussion with some talking points. We can start from the beginning, or I can answer you guys' question first. I just wanted to clarify that currently there is no process for non-renewal. The lease simply expires or it renews. One of the discussion items in committee over the past few months was increasing the notice period for non-renewal from 30 days to 90 days. So that's the only process for non-renewal right now. For eviction, it's material non-compliance or non-payment of rent. So that's eviction is something you would pursue in the middle of a lease. But if you all would allow, I can go into all of the 47 changes.
I think
I have, there are 23 items that were discussed by the task force.
They don't want us to go line by line.
So I think it sounds like we really want to focus on the.
Oh, you only want to talk about just cause.
I think, first of all, I think it's really going to be complicated for us, and it's going to, and we have a lot of questions. So, and we have a lot of people here who are.
And I'm certainly happy to, I do want to recognize that I did have the floor and I was interrupted by members, but certainly Lindsay can answer questions, but I just want to.
maintain the floor.
I apologize. That was me.
Yeah. Go ahead. Yes.
So what I personally would find helpful, because I think someone made the point in the audience, there's a difference between an eviction and a decision not to renew a lease. So what I would find helpful would be to say, let's focus on just cause. Let's start by just saying evictions, or let's start by just looking at non-lease renewal. Here's the current approach, and here's what would be different.
Well,
if that's okay, or someone else can choose that. I mean, I'm just throwing out an idea. It just feels like we should get kind of a sense of how we're going to do this in kind of an orderly
Yeah,
fashion.
I would say that particular issue is one that we're all, those of us who are not so well versed in this topic have a lot of questions about. So that would be helpful. Ugo, is that you? Your light? I'm sorry.
No, but I do have something to say, and it's that what we're talking here is non-payment. If it's at the time of renewal of the lease, then it can be used as a reason for not, as a just cause for not renewing the lease. But if it's in the middle of the term of the lease, you have to give the 10-day notice and then take the tenant to court to evict it. It's not that 10 days pass and here you are out, Mr. Tenant, with all your belongings on the sidewalk. It doesn't work that way. So you still have to take that tenant to court, and that court could take 3 months, 9 months, a year. During COVID, you couldn't do it. So it is a very tough process. On a side note, I wanted to add that I've heard many times during our task force meetings that don't worry, we'll have more time to discuss this later, but then there is no time to discuss this later.
You're wasting the time now by not discussing it.
Yeah. So.
Chair, I'd like to reclaim the floor. I was going through the actual ordinance, which is talking about the reasons that someone can not renew or evict. The answer to the question, or what is the policy around non-renewal? There is none. That is why we are here. Because any housing provider, landlord, whatever they want to call themselves, can not renew a lease for any reason or no reason. That's the landscape right now.
So that's helpful information. So that's where we are now. So
Right. And that's where we are now. And then as far as eviction, you can evict for, non-payment of rent, material non-compliance, the reasons that are still in this ordinance. So we're maintaining the just cause reasons for eviction and ensuring that you can't either evict or non-renew for no reason. That's the base of, that's what the whole ordinance is about. And if I may just go through just cause reason number one for someone to not renew is non-payment of rent. If you don't pay rent, you can be non-renewed at the end of the lease. You can be for non-payment. If you're near the end of your lease, you can be evicted, whatever the process that the housing provider wants to use. Material non-compliance. This is
Wait, let's make sure we are squared away on.
Oh, okay.
On each sentence practically.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, I have a question. I think the question or the comment I'm going to make is that the difference, and I think I'm saying this correctly, is that if a landlord chooses not to renew a lease under the terms of the just cause ordinance, if the tenant doesn't agree, he will have to, or she will then have to go through an eviction or legal process that costs money and time. Whether it's good or bad is not the point here. I just think I want it to be clear that right now a landlord has the right to non-renew for almost any reason. They won't in most cases, but in some cases they can if they just don't want to. Sometimes there's a good reason for that. If they're selling the property, or I'm sure there's other good reasons, but I just want to be clear that there's a new hurdle for the housing provider when this ordinance comes into play, that they will now have to go through a legal process.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. What is the new hurdle?
That rather than being able not to renew a lease, I'm not saying good or bad. I'm not making a
You're
judgment.
saying that in order to not renew, they'd have to go through they'd have to go to court to not renew?
That is that's what a question or comment. That's my understanding.
That's a really good question. And that is not the case. Housing providers could not renew a lease and not have to go to court. The only reason they would go to court is if the tenant themselves feels as though they have been slighted by the housing provider and the housing provider didn't follow the code. And in that case, the tenant can take the housing provider to court. And that is the American justice system. We don't just, arbitrarily hand down rulings as to what facts are. You go in front of an arbiter, in front of a judge, people present their sides, and then the judge makes a determination as to whether or not, or a jury, as to whether or not a violation was made based on the evidence. So that is the American legal process. And I want to note that this ordinance does require that if the tenant is successful in their case, that their legal fees would be covered by the housing provider as a penalty for violating the ordinance. And so that is the case. And if I may continue.
Oh, no, because we have some questions and comments from.
Do I get time to speak to the ordinance? I mean, I keep getting cut off as I'm going through the actual.
We're stuck on the first sentence here.
Well, yeah, there wasn't a question about non-payment of rent there.
I had a question stuck on this.
Please go
sentence.
ahead.
Yeah, so I'm still actually somewhat stuck on your question, sort of Councilmember Reed's answer to your question as well, because so you've laid out the sort of eviction process, right? And you've laid out the court process now, if we have just cause. If, the sort of legal hurdle is rejected or what have you, and the tenant wants to take the the housing provider to court. What is the actual, can you explain though, just what it would look like for that not to happen? Is it just that the housing provider does not renew and then sort of pays the relocation assistance? Is that the idea? But I just want to have a very clear sense of what happens after that non-renewal in a sort of new hypothetical just cause landscape that looks different than today, which my understanding is a non-renewal, just nothing happens, right?
Right. And so the non-renewal, there are two categories. There's one for the just cause, there's non-payment of rent, material non-compliance, and there's refusal to renew the rental agreement. Those are tenant fault examples of a just cause for eviction, right? If the tenant's not paying the rent, tenant material non-compliance, or the tenant refuses. And then there are a second category of housing provider fault reasons for the non-renewal, which would include a condominium conversion that would be occupancy by the homeowner or by the housing provider or a qualified relative. That would be significant repairs that make that cause the property be deemed uninhabitable by a licensed professional. And then that would be removal of the unit from the rental market in place. And so for the last four, that is where relocation assistance would be triggered, except in the case of tenant refusal to renew, which is a provision that, has been raised. And I think there is a reason for us to dig deeper into that. I'm not discounting that there have been some court cases that challenge this particular provision. But in the case of a tenant refusal to renew because rent has increased more than 15%, that would trigger relocation assistance as well. And so those are the only places where relocation assistance get triggered, which is right for the housing provider fault reasons and not for the tenant fault reasons.
So let me just circle back and see if you want to have a follow-up question.
So I think my question is maybe even more basic in terms of what this looks like in implementation. Does landlord check a box or something and then it's just understood that it's
the housing provider would provide at the time of non-renewal or obviously if they're evicting someone they have to provide the reason, but at the time of non-renewal they would tell the tenant why they're not renewing and
then that triggers some sort of
doesn't
assistance or
trigger anything unless the tenant feels that the housing provider was incorrect in that, or they were unjust in that, and then the tenant would have the right to take the housing provider to court.
Thank you. That's very helpful.
Okay, yes, Lauren.
I'm really not trying to beat a dead horse here, but I'm experiencing some cognitive dissonance, and I'm just going to close my eyes and stick to my job of trying to understand this in the way that benefits our community. So I feel like in the audience, there are a lot of housing providers who are insisting that inserting a just cause eviction notice will shrink their capacity to choose not to renew a lease. And I feel like what I'm hearing, and potentially completely incorrectly, so I trust you'll correct me, but I feel like what I'm hearing from the committee potentially is that yes, there's this potential new hurdle of an eviction, but otherwise nothing changes. And I'm having a hard time. It feels like the perception is significantly different between these two sides. And so I'm trying to understand, like, is it the only difference is that we would add in the layer of eviction? I mean, excuse me, of going to court. I'm trying to understand the difference here.
The difference is this ordinance is an ordinance that provides folks with a legal remedy to go to court if they feel that they are unjustly
the folks being the tenant. So in the case of the example of someone who's dealing drugs, and again, I'm just trying to understand this.
So, and plus, one, I want to say, please, I appreciate questions about this ordinance.
Okay. And so someone has a cat, because I feel like dealing drugs is illegal, and that's a whole complicated thing. It's a no pet building, no smoking, someone's smoking, petting their cat all day long, and that's all they're doing, right? So the landlord approaches them, talks to them about this. There's this idea of curing before day 10. So walk me through, please, under the current legislation in simple terms. Joe, the landlord, finds out that John is smoking and petting. Like, what happens? No, I'm being serious. I'm just trying to keep it simple. What happens now, and what would be different under the proposed change?
So what happens now is if the housing provider sees a need to move, let's say it's in the lease that John can't
smoke, can't have a pet. Yeah, it's like legit breaking the rules.
That's in the lease. The housing provider could move to evict them in that moment, and that's the same under this ordinance, and that's the same currently. Or the housing provider could choose, maybe they're 3 months away from the end of their lease. They don't want to have to go through the eviction process. They can say, hey, I'm just not going to renew this person's lease, and either tell John, hey, I'm not renewing because you smoked and petted, or I am, or just not tell them. They can either tell them or not tell them why, but they could just not renew the lease. Under this ordinance, if they choose to not renew, or if they choose to move to evict, they would have to provide John with notice and saying, hey, you are violating the lease. And the same thing would happen under the current laws. They'd have to give them a 10-day notice, and they would say, hey, you either have to stop smoking in this unit and remove the cat and remedy the situation, in which case you can stay, or they would that is the current landscape. They'd have to provide them with that notice and move to evict if they're doing it during the term of the lease.
Okay.
The problem with that approach is what the gentleman here, and I'm sorry, I forgot your name.
The cycle of misconduct.
Yes. Exemplify on one of his slides is that if that tenant conveniently stops petting the cat and smoking the cigarettes in the unit on day 10 and does it consecutively every month, you have really no option. You have no option, even if you have a repeat offender in your house or affecting somebody else. I am very allergic to cats. Other people are allergic to smoke or have asthma or whatever. So it's inflicting in other people's life, but it's stopping on day 10. And that is a problem. We can't take them anymore we cannot refuse to renew because they're complying with the ordinance as we're proposing.
Got it. So currently you can just not renew. They always stop on day 9.
Oh, hold on. If I can get a point of, I think Mr. John, in the I think we have an attorney here, and so maybe we can get some you're in
John Bartlett.
I think John has more, one of the things that I more experience with this particular, but what I will say is that, I think this is a question for us to flag, right? I'm not saying that there is no legitimate concern there. This conversation is meant to make adjustments. My belief is that the situation, if the person is repeating this over and over and they're doing it, they fix it 1 month and then they start doing it again the next month, they have not remedied the situation and thereby are eligible to be evicted or not renewed or whatever the case may be. This idea that they can just start the cycle over every 30 days as if our legal system is just going to have amnesia is ridiculous. And so, this repeated behavior can be, in my opinion, addressed. And if our law department or deems that is not sufficient language, I think we can certainly add in language that makes this clearer. And so maybe it's a 60-day, 90-day period, whatever the case may be.
Right. So Kathy and then Councilmember Harakaris.
No, I actually the discussion was helpful. I just also wanted to point out that under the current law and what is happening, it sounds like, based on things people have been saying about the Avador, is that currently, if there is no a housing provider cannot renew a lease for things other than what are noted in the ordinance that are eviction worthy causes. So if you're smoking in your unit and you're not supposed to be smoking in your unit, then that is something that could be eviction worthy. I'm not using the
Material non-compliance.
Material non-compliance. Thank you. But what I think not the whole, but part of just cause is there has to be a reason you're not renewing this lease. I think, again, not making judgment, just saying that there is a chance that a housing provider could potentially just not renew a lease without providing a justification.
Yeah, and that seems to be what we're hearing at the Avador.
Yeah.
Councilmember Harakaris.
And so I've had discussions with housing providers about this. And I think the main fear is that you can't get rid of a problem tenant. But in my reading of this, if you have someone who is smoking and petting his cat while dealing drugs, all these things, at the end, when you give him a letter and say, we're not renewing your lease, what are the chances they have the financial means to get a lawyer to sue you to say that I was not smoking and petting my cat and dealing drugs?
So lawyers now they're 6 months now, and you have to pay their attorneys.
And just point of information that
No.
Point of information, the attorneys are not free. It is only in the case the tenant is successful in their legal pursuits, not just willy-nilly all. Their question was about affording attorneys, so.
So Councilmember Harakaris, are you?
I mean, that's.
Excuse me.
But I mean, and this is where I think everyone's, and maybe the language needs to be cleaned up, but that is not the intent. If you have a bad tenant, you should be able, but you know what? You should also give them the courtesy to say like, hey, you are a terrible tenant. This is why we're not renewing. And everyone here says that you would not do what is happening at the Avador, but we have to get a fix for those folks because the situation they're in is scary and untenable, right? So that's not the intent of, we don't want people to not be able to non-renew bad tenants. And one of the things I think I'm in favor of is owner occupied units, 2 flats, just take it out of, because it's your house, you're a roommate.
Right.
But it's practically having a roommate, right? So, I mean, that might clear up maybe half the people in the room who are concerned, but like going forward, I think we need some clarity. And we have somebody in the back.
Well, we can't really,
Right.
we need to keep the conversation here at the dais. But I agree with you, Councilmember Hirakaris, we need an exception for owner occupied.
If I may, I think I
Yes.
had my light on for
I'm
a while
sorry.
already.
Okay.
No,
Yes, right.
Thank you. There are a couple of things with the ordinance as it's proposed right now. And one is that it's overriding the fact that tenant and housing provider are entering into a contract that has terms to it, a beginning, an end, rules in between. We all live by them, but it has an end. And we're taking away the right from the landlord to say, all right, we came to the end of the road. This is it. And I know that there is an inconvenience for the tenant, but there are other solutions for that person or for that family. But that is not the point really that I'm trying to make. It's just that there is a contract. We still are dealing with a lease, which is a contract between two parties. So besides that, this ordinance as it stands, as is proposed, is taking away the right from the housing provider to claim attorney fees, while it is given it to the tenant to claim attorney fees if they prevail. If a landlord prevails, that has taken away to reclaim attorney fees from the tenants. So it's still lopsided. I think that what's happening with the Avidor, we learned it about 3 months ago, and I'm really surprised that there is no attorney coming out to your aid and help you with that. Because it's horrendous. It's horrendous.
They know that there's going to be, we have due process. And that's really something if you haven't.
Absolutely, and we need to address it. Definitely.
I don't need a lawyer.
Right.
What we need is a law, and that will shape their behavior if they know that they're gonna have somebody fight them.
All right. Sure. Thank you.
Okay.
That's it,
So where are we? Lindsay, did you have anything that you wanted to say before we continue our deep dive into the just cause piece?
Where exactly are we?
We are at the very beginning of the just cause.
We're still on.
I think that it would be more productive to, have an overview of the 7 reasons, which I believe Councilmember Reed already went through. And then following that, the relocation assistance provisions, and then following that, the remedies to not abiding by the just cause for eviction provisions and relocation assistance. But I'm unclear if that's the direction you guys want to go.
I think that sounds like what we want to try to cover tonight. Okay. I'm almost going to get back to you, Councilmember Reed, but let me just go to Ugo one more time.
Sure.
No, you're okay. Oh, okay. Whoops. Oh, yeah, Joanne.
I know, if you don't mind.
Yep, please.
That originally I thought there was going to be an exemption for under 6 units. Is that in here or not?
Not currently, no.
Yeah, because I have a concern with that.
There is an exemption for, or there's a different set of rules for relocation assistance for folks who have under 6 units.
Right, but they're still covered by the ordinance. I mean.
And if I can, we'll come back around to that, because I would like to respond to that concern about removing the folks, small housing providers.
Okay, Councilmember Reed. Oops.
Oh, I do see Ms. Berlin. Oh, okay. Yeah. Right. So I understand the desire to potentially remove small housing providers with 6 or fewer units from the relocation assistance requirements of this ordinance. Owner occupied, I'm sorry, maybe that's only owner occupied. What I don't think is appropriate is saying that just because the owner lives in the building that they can evict people for no reason. Again, they're providing housing. They are choosing to provide the housing to people in the public, and they should have the same obligations as anyone else who is engaging in the act of providing housing. And folks need stability, whether they're living in a unit that has 4 units in the building, or they're living in a building that has 30 units in the building. These are basic reasons for eviction or non-renewal, and these basic rights should apply to every resident of Evanston, regardless of whether they're living in an owner-occupied unit or not. And I, in fact, fear that by not including owner-occupied units, if I was a tenant, why would I want to live in an owner-occupied building if I know that I don't have basic rights to housing stability? I don't think it's a great proposition. I would ask that folks be respectful of the process.
Okay. Is this, wait, excuse me. Lauren.
Yeah. Well, I think on the question of like the order, it seems like we aren't making a decision on that. So I just want you to know I see that. But, I think the reason to potentially have a carve out for mom and pop multifamily is because they're also in a full carve out. So, I think there's a lot of research that shows that really small mom and pops it's a different business model. Like all of the economies of scale are not available. I think I think it's a different landscape. So maybe we just need to not say, let's have a carve out or not, but maybe we need to say, let's look at what the implications would be for mom and pops, whether you want to say it's 6. I mean, a lot of times I think mom and pops are considered 4 and under, but we could look at that. Someone provided us a San Diego exemption. It seems to me that's a little bit down the road. I feel like we sort of have this huge, it seems to me the first piece of this conversation is just this idea of just cause. And I do agree with whoever is saying there's a difference between non-lease renewal and an eviction. It may not always feel different to the tenant if they feel like they suddenly aren't going to have a place to live, but there is a huge difference in terms of the hit to the credit. I mean, whatever, you all don't need me to tell you all of this. So I think that as we try to work through this policy, we have to think about those two different things, especially because we're treating eviction as a tool, right? We're adding it as a potential. Going to the courts is a tool. And so while I understand the point that anyone could go get legal representation, I don't know that that's encouraging. I feel very bad for a person who thinks that they're in a unit. Suddenly they feel like they are being, rightly or wrongly, they perceive that they should not have to leave the unit. And the opportunity is to go to the court. I understand the point, but it's not clear to me that that's reassuring. So anyways, I think that's the big question. Do we think we should be adding this layer? And then we have these other questions. Do we think the fees are appropriate or not? Some of them maybe are, some of them maybe aren't. And I think that we do have to figure out how to kind of work through that in some sort of order.
Yeah. So if we all have our draft in front of us and we look at, so it's on page 21.
Oh, okay.
I'm on page 21. So no housing provider shall terminate or not renew a rental agreement or attempt to recover possession or initiate or prosecute an eviction or other actions. So it's basically covering the waterfront, Lauren. Whoops. Where did you go? There you go. Unless the housing provider establishes one or more of the following grounds. So is that opening sentence clear to everybody? And are we okay with it to move down the list?
So it's saying here are the reasons you would not renew a lease.
Right. Then we get into the actual reasons.
It says you must establish one of the following.
Right. The following grounds. So that's the basic premise.
So
of
it
the
in
note
fact
of
says the
just
opposite. It
cause.
says here are the reasons that you can,
Right. Yeah.
not renew or evict.
Yeah.
And can I ask a logistical question? And so if you think about employment law, right, and this idea that you need to have cause to fire someone, and there is a process to document wrongdoing or poor performance, and then you feel like you have your case and you can present it. Is that how this would be handled? So you would document instances of smoking and petting the cat with email or whatever, and then you would have a file of that to present to a court, to the city. Who would that go to?
It would be a file maintained by the housing provider in the case that if they need to go to court to evict someone,
Yeah.
that would be the requirement for eviction regardless. And then if they fear that when they choose to not renew, they might face legal action, then they would be required to document why they did not renew.
So at this stage, the only additional requirement we're certain of that we're asking housing providers is that they keep good documentation.
It's not a requirement. No, there's no requirement.
It's in their best interest.
It's in their best interest. Yes.
To document what's going
Correct.
on effectively. Okay.
Okay, so now we get to the first reason, non-payment of rent, which is a very long section.
Keep going. I'm just flipping on my light. You can keep doing what you're doing.
Okay, Ugo, did you want to talk about that?
You know, I do. And, you know, the first is to bring back my first point, and it is that, as we can see, this needs a lot of discussion. This is really serious. And we're on that point of the having evidence and stuff like that. I know a lot of people that don't have the sophistication to think about it. They own a 2-flat because they put everything they had work in their lives to buy it. And they're not going to be sophisticated enough to have it, at least not within the time appropriate to go to court with that. And we're affecting that because the net with casting is so wide.
But I think maybe we're planning to, they'd be excluded from this, the 2-flat.
We haven't determined that. So
No,
I
I know,
wanted to make the point.
And if I can jump in there very quickly, I really appreciate the analogy to employment law, right? One, as the housing providers know, your rental units are taxed as if commercial property, right? That's what's happening with multifamily units. You're taxed as if it is commercial property. You're not taxed at the same residential rate as someone who's living in their house. And so
Go ahead.
All right. Well, that's not what I'm hearing from the housing providers in my ward. They're saying that their taxes are jumping because they are taxed as commercial. Okay, I'm gonna continue on. My point being there is I appreciate the analogy to employment law. Whether someone has 1 employee or 500 employees, they are required to treat those employees within regulations that are deemed appropriate by law, and they have to maintain documentation of adverse action against the employee for violations of their workplace policies. This is basic stuff for someone who's a business owner, right? These aren't, these folks are using their houses as investments. And that's unfortunate. That is the landscape in America currently, but this is an investment, and that is part of running a business. You have to maintain proper documentation, particularly when your business is dealing with something as crucial as housing. Chair, I would like us to continue on. Thank you.
Right. Okay. So we have the question of whether we're going to exempt small.
I think we should go through.
No, I know, but I mean, just, to say this sentence may be more acceptable once we've made that, whether we decided to exclude small landlords or property.
I think we have to understand what the regulations are first before we can make that.
Yeah, no, I know. I'm just
decision.
sort of trying to.
I have it
signal
noted
that, so
that
then
you
we
guys
can-
would like to come back to the possible exclusion of small landlords or owner occupied 2-flats, et cetera, upon review of all of the provisions.
Right, yeah. But I'm just sort of saying you can feel one way about this initial sentence if you think we're going to exempt small landlords or not, but
I would say this.
We'll come back to that particular issue and go into the whole big paragraph about non-payment of rent. Is there something we should look at there? Councilmember Reed.
Yeah. So with non-payment of rent, this is nothing new here. This is the standard procedure if someone isn't paying rent. The only new thing here, which was not a part of, and I want to be clear, a part of the Just Cause Task Force discussion. This was what the committee decided is the one-time tenant right to pay and stay, but that is also located here.
And don't we have that currently, don't we?
No,
Yes,
that-
we already discussed one-time right to pay and stay at our July meeting, and the committee agreed to putting it into our draft ordinance. However, due to the addition of a just cause and having duplicity in the section that one-time right to pay and stay originally went into, we had to place it in this section. So it's just something to take note of, regardless of whatever changes you guys might choose to make to the just cause provisions. You might want to consider separating those changes from the one-time right to pay and stay.
Okay. Ugo, your light. Are you trying to? No, sorry. Okay, good. Yeah, so committee members, do you have any questions, comments, concerns about the big section number 1 about non-payment of rent, including the one-time right to pay and stay? Does that all seem pretty straightforward? Okay.
That brings us.
Nothing in this subsection shall be construed to impair a housing provider's obligation to provide notice of termination of tenancy in subsidized housing as required under federal law. Okay, federal law.
And just, I don't know if anybody needs clarification there, but federal law has much greater requirements for notice than anything we're talking about here.
Okay.
I would like for us to consider that what if it's a repeat offender within the term of the lease, 12 months, and it's 4 times, but it cured it at the right time because it knows the ordinance well. Is there an option for that housing provider to not renew? It's being cured every time. Every step of the process, that tenant is ahead and it's a bad tenant. That typically doesn't happen, but it could happen. And that will be a problem. And if the landlord doesn't have that, at least somebody else mentioned on one of our prior meetings, the ability to have that as a leverage tool in their toolbox to say, hey, I'm not going to renew your lease. One more and you're out.
Yeah.
If we don't have that provision, and it's not one yet in here, so I think that we're defaulting all the landlords of that ability.
I just want a point of information, clarify that one, when you say they cured it in a time, are you saying that they paid within the 10-day requirement that is currently in place? Sure. And you're saying this person does that every single month?
I'm not saying every single
or they do it repeatedly. It's often enough. I would assume that would be in the lease that if someone is late on rent and beyond that 10-day period, which is allowed by Evanston law currently, and they do this on a repeated basis, that would be material noncompliance, or that would just be not paying the rent.
So are you saying that if I have a provision on my lease that counters this ordinance, the lease prevails?
I'm not saying that
okay,
at all.
So then doesn't work. Then it doesn't.
What I'm
then
saying,
you have to put it here.
What I'm saying is that there's nothing in the ordinance that would not allow a housing provider to move to either not renew or evict someone who is habitually not paying their rent.
It says here.
Where does it
They
say
cure
that?
it within 10 days.
Well, that's the current law. That is the current law. Is that?
Excuse me. Quiet, please.
But it's denying the right to not renew that tenant for that reason, because they have caught up at the last moment.
Committee member Rodriguez,
times.
Can I just clarify, are you suggesting that we incorporate language that states that repeated non-payment of rent or repeated cases of material noncompliance would be good cause to non-renew. Should we, would that be
will
helpful to
be
add that
one.
language?
Yeah, that will be one option. And, to clarify also what is repeated, because repeated is being used in another parts of the ordinance, and it doesn't say really a number. So it's open to interpretation. One judge might say it's 3 times, another judge will say we need 8 times. So we really need to clarify those things and more discussion. And it's already almost 9:10.
Right, yeah. Lauren. Words of wisdom. No, okay.
Well, I was just going to say, it sounds like, if I'm understand correctly, to stick with the employment law analogy, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, Councilmember Reed, so I trust you will correct me if I'm wrong, but it sounds like, as you understand it, if this person cures on day 10 and they do this 5 times and you want to non-renew, as long as you've documented that they are consistently late in payment, that is allowed or no? No. Okay. All right.
I'm sorry.
I think.
Can I respond?
Yeah, Kathy.
My understanding was that right now, as long as they cure within the cure period, under this new language, they would not have the right to not renew the lease for that cause.
Yeah. Okay, I have, Joanne, we haven't heard from you lately.
Yeah, I mean, I think we need to put in something about that, because I live in a condo association, I'm on the board, a townhouse association, and we have people who get behind in their assessment and then they pay up. And, we go after them, and they do this repeatedly. And so I think we need to put something in there that if you repeatedly cure, there is the one-time cure, but if they do this as, he presented possibilities, then I think we need to include something that you can say, no, I'm not going to renew your lease, because it's just added stress for the landlord of just having to deal with this and maybe go to eviction court. How many times do you want to try to evict the same person? It costs money. And then if your tenant is going to get the legal fees, that's added expense.
Point of order. I just want to be clear. It is current law in Evanston that you have the right to pay within 10 days. No one is suggesting that we change that, right?
No, but we have the right to not renew right now. If with this, you don't. That is the difference. Well, that is the argument.
Right. And so, but if our law is you cannot evict someone, hold on, wait, let me finish my sentence. Sure. If the law is that you cannot, that if we're saying we don't want someone displaced because if they pay within 10 days, why would we say that we want someone that's what our goal is? Our goal is not to displace people who pay their rent within 10 days of the due date. And this idea that folks would not renew because someone paid within the legal time period that is allotted to them, why would that be a reason to not renew someone's lease? They've paid within the legal time period that the city of Evanston has delineated. You have 10 days. Some communities, folks, hold on. Please stop. Order in here. Stop. We have a meeting here, and it is inappropriate that all of this yelling back and forth. If we want to hear you, someone from the board will ask for your testimony. But, well, then any of my colleagues has the right here to give a point of information and correct me. I did not say anything that is wrong. And if someone thinks I did, please correct me.
That's like
if I can just finish what I was saying here.
Okay.
I don't know of a mortgage agreement in America that says if you don't pay within 10 days that you are going to lose your property and woe is the person who is 10 days late on a mortgage payment. There are you are running a business. There's cash flow with every single business. Folks have a right under current law to pay within 10 days. It is not to me, a sufficient reason to not renew someone's lease because they have paid within the legal time period. Thank you.
Kathy and then Ugo.
If I understand this correctly, to distinguish, it's not a matter of the period of time in which you're allowed to pay your rent. I'm sure housing providers may give a window, just like somebody who has a mortgage has probably like 15 days to pay. It's after you receive your late notice, you have 10 days to cure. Is that
correct?
Correct. Okay, so they're already late. And now they've gotten notice. And 6 times out of the year, they consistently pay on the 10th day. So now if you've already given them 15 days leeway, now it's 24 days that your rent is late. And this has happened, let's say 6 times throughout the year. It's an ongoing issue for a housing provider who has to pay their mortgage during the allotted time, so they don't get a very extensive fee.
Point of information.
It is just saying that I think it's fair. I mean, I have a friend whose lease I helped her with, and she has 10 days after the due date to pay the rent. That's part of her lease. So I'm not sure that this is saying giving more time to the tenant.
10 days.
10 days
after
the 10th.
receipt of written notice from the housing provider.
Yeah.
Of the housing provider's intention to terminate the rental agreement if rent is not paid.
Oh.
That written notice
Right,
is
okay.
not going to come unless the rent hasn't been paid
After
within.
that first 10 days. Oh my gosh. Okay.
Chair Rebel,
Yeah.
typically a lease will have the clause that the tenant cannot give notice before 5 days. It's called 5-day notice that you're late on your payment, plus the 10 days. Now we're on 15 days. And that's what it is. So we're talking about 10 days additionally to when the landlord
Okay,
gives
that's what's not-
because that is
that's not
10
very
days
clear,
after he's given notice.
Okay.
According to this, it's 10 days after giving notice. So, and we cannot give notice on day 2. We have to wait. So there is additional time. This is additional time, which, it's not so much the issue of the additional time is the fact that we cannot use any of this history as the proposed stands if there is a repetition of that offense, of that lateness onto their payment of their rent. And the obligations of the landlord have to be paid also.
Right.
So Mr. Reed is using the word that this is a business transaction that the housing providers enter into it conveniently on the housing provider side. But on the other side is their home. We have to protect it and stuff, which I totally agree with that. But we cannot conveniently say is not their home also for the housing provider, particularly for those who live on those properties. It's their home. And we're talking about their business. Is their home and their business. That's their chosen word. But so is their chosen path for the tenants to live in that situation, in those apartments. So it's a business interaction that we're trying to find a middle ground in which everybody is treated, or we have the sensation that this is fair ground. Otherwise, a lot of landlords that have the opportunity to sell will sell. And the ones buying, because this is a divesting community now, will be big investors. And we know the problem that could bring to our community.
So I detect that there's confusion about.
If I can clarify here. So 2 things. One, there, to my understanding, there's no requirement in Evanston law that says that you couldn't give someone a 10-day notice the first day that they're late on rent. That you could say that if you don't pay your rent, you're now late. If you don't pay it within this 10-day period, we will move to evict.
Lease to you. I'll bring a model lease to you next time.
Well, no, bring up the code that says that that is a requirement.
Now, the model lease from Evanston,
All right.
that's what I'll bring to you.
The code that says that's a requirement. And so so one, there's no, again, requirement that it's going to be 15 days, 24 days, whatever the case may be. The housing provider can provide the notice the day that the person is late. I am happy. I mean, this is a simple amendment. I'm happy to say that, if they're 10 days past due in accordance with our law, rather than, having to give the notice, I think it's appropriate that they would provide this notice, that they have the 10-day period once they are late. And so nothing would stop the housing provider from issuing that.
Diverting to the point, which is
nothing would stop the housing provider from issuing that 10-day notice.
Which is the right of the housing provider to not renew that lease if there is a repeat offender on the late payment.
Right. I will also note that, again, in Evanston, we have a legal right to pay within 10 days. I've stated it before. If that is our legal right here, we need to uphold that legal right in all cases. I also want to be clear that on the issue, again, this is a business. If you choose to make providing, just give me a second.
Right.
If you choose to make housing your business, you have to create cash flow scenarios that make sense. So if you know that your mortgage payment is due on the 15th, and you know that you have to provide a 10-day notice to folks before they pay, then you have to schedule this, when folks' rent is due in order to allow for that potential period to happen.
Okay.
Yes, they should. But we have a law in Evanston that allows folks 10 days.
So ladies and gentlemen, it seems to me that we need a little bit of rewording of this to make everybody comfortable with saying the tenant has 10 days to pay the rent, because that's our basic tenant. I think that's our tenant handbook. And so what we're trying to do is we need language that says, some other number of days after that is when the idea of non-payment of rent would enter the picture.
I think with this language, and I'm fine to make that amendment, but I want us to keep in mind that this language just requires the housing provider to say, hey, you're late on rent, you have 10 days. And so it requires them to give notice that you were late and what your time period to pay is.
But we're trying to determine when is it acceptable for the landlord to send that, the housing provider to issue that letter to the tenant.
The day that they're late.
Well, but I think we're unclear about when that date is. So Lauren.
Yeah, I do have a concern. I think we have a lot of people in the business of providing housing who are telling us there's some misunderstanding here with how some things go. I have a lot of respect for people who want to respect tenants' rights. It's stuff I work on. I think it's critically important. I also think we don't know everything, and I think we need to do a better job of understanding where the pushback is coming from by housing providers and discussing it. I feel like there's a sense where we're having people tell us that's not how this works, and we have people in the field telling us that, and they're doing it day to day. And whether they're doing that for their own self-interest or not, it may also be true. And I think that we need to listen to that a little bit. My concern in all of this is that we can price multifamily out the wazoo. That's fine. We can make it extremely expensive to operate multifamily in our jurisdiction. That's fine. But I guarantee you those fees are going to be passed on to our tenants. And at some point, we're going to have to strike a middle ground. And if we have housing providers pushing back on 40 of the 47 things, we should probably figure out what's most important, where we're going to get the most bang for our buck, and do some compromise. I feel like there's this dynamic where I don't know that we all are in agreement on all of this. And so we just need to be able to hear from the people who aren't in agreement, a little bit better, and maybe that means slowing the conversation down. I understand it already feels very slow. I understand people feel very strongly. I think that's wonderful. We need it. But we have to understand what we're doing here. And it feels like this is getting rushed a little. I don't know what you were going to say, and I don't know if I would agree with what you were going to say, but I also don't know when things what the rules are on notice. And I recognize as a business owner that if we're asking you to push that out to 20 days, you're essentially providing free financing, right? I mean, mortgage lending, which is more my area as homeownership, is not really necessarily a one-to-one comparison. It's a homeowner. It's a very different proposition to engage in, right? And so then between a tenant and a landlord. And again, just to make clear, I think tenants need to have rights for sure. But I understand the concern in terms of your cash flow. I understand that it's essentially you're accruing interest, like in the relationship management matters. If their payment isn't in within 4 hours of the deadline and you have to issue your notice right then. So I just think there's legitimate, we still have to understand it, a little bit better than it feels like we're understanding some of it. I don't
know. So Joanne.
Yeah, I am for taking as much time as is needed and not to rush this. Everybody, there's so much confusion going on. I don't know if city staff now can tell us what the city, landlord lease now, what the number of days you have to wait to give it. I can't remember, but I use it myself. But, this is a major overhaul.
It's 10 days.
We want to get it right and not rushed. It's what?
10 days.
10 days. So
You have 10 days to pay your
No,
rent.
but how long do we have to wait to give notice?
To give notice.
As soon as they're late.
No.
It's on the lease.
As soon as they are late.
Yeah, by
Rent
ordinance
is
is
due on the
as-
first,
yeah.
and you don't have the rent on the first, you can issue a 10-day
And
notice.
we have the.
Then we should look at the model
who
lease.
claim to be
So
experts saying
let's
this, and they don't know the basics of our laws.
So
That's
But
scary.
anyway,
This is
this is
providing
a-
housing and they don't know
No,
the basics of the law.
Councilmember Reed, just
Rush
a minute.
this and
then let's look at the model lease.
landlord.
Let's just look at the lease that the city of Evanston is suggesting and let's just see what they say. Let's see what it says.
I want us to understand the lobby that we are facing here. I have big tobacco folks coming in saying that our tobacco ordinance is going to be detrimental to their business model. There's no difference between that and folks who are using housing as an investment model to make money. They have a huge interest here.
Okay.
And they want us to slow this down, but they cannot provide clear provisions as to what is the issue here. What I keep hearing is we need to slow this down. We need to slow this down.
And you
The only
keep wanting to
confusion
rush
that is
it.
being created here, the only confusion that is being created here is by people who are misinformed and spreading misinformation. Let's read the
Councilmember Reed,
ordinance. Let's pay
Councilmember Reed.
attention to the language that is on the page. And when we do that, there will not be confusion.
Well, it seems like there is confusion. I'm not speaking about the audience. I'm speaking about the members of the up on the.
Well, then let's ask the questions.
So
I at this point, it's 9:30.
Yeah.
And it seems like this might be a good time to stop for the evening.
Right. And I guess I would ask Lindsay to try to see if there's a way to make this particular section a little clearer about when the late notice would be sent.
The day that the
No
person-
problem.
Right.
Yes, we can bring
Just
just
to, my request to see a model leases because presumably the model lease represents what the city considers best practices in a rental agreement. That's usually what a model lease is used for. So it would be just helpful to see what the city is putting forward as the terms of a good lease.
What we need to look at is what the law is. The model lease, hold on, what the model lease is based on what the law was. We need to look at what the proposed law is and what the law currently is. And that is what's important. The model lease is a model lease. It's not anything that is dictated by law.
Council Reed,
Folks
I
required to use it.
understand. I understand what a model lease is. I'm just asking for additional information and I appreciate your commitment to the issue and I stand with you on it. I just want to make sure we still have housing that's affordable. Believe it or not, I agree with a lot of what you're saying. I just want to proceed with clarity and make sure that we do this in a way where we don't end up with institutional investors owning 95% of our stock in 10 years. That's all.
Yeah.
And well, that is not what this ordinance is
Yeah.
going to do.
Right,
And
okay,
to
but-
even
yeah, but it-
insinuate that that's what this
No,
ordinance is going
yeah,
to do
but we're-
shows a bias toward housing providers. I'm not hearing folks say, mention concerns about tenants. What I keep hearing over and over from this committee is this is going to do this to housing providers. This is going to create some undue burden. No, it's going to create the proper amount of burden when you're providing housing for human beings.
So the last thing, no, in case it's helpful, because I don't mean this antagonistically at all. I feel like the provisions do so much to protect tenants that I just want to be careful that we settle somewhere where we don't also lose sight of relationships with multifamily housing providers. And I don't want to speak for anyone else on that, but that's all. I just feel like we have gone from maybe not enough protections. I don't know. That's why I want to learn more, to maybe so many that we risk losing some important stakeholders. So I'm trying to help explain where I'm coming from here in a spirit of working together. I work on low-income housing. I know what the cost burden rates are in this nation. I know that affordable housing is out of control. I know that rent growth continues to rise, even it has gone down since the pandemic. And if you want to dive in, we can dive in. All I'm saying is I don't want to lose our housing providers either.
Yeah.
I see you nodding your head.
Can I add to this, please? Thank you. I agree. Thank you for your work on this. I don't disagree with the need to provide protections to tenants and more protections. I share these various opinions that we need to slow this down a bit. One question that I have that I wonder if the staff can help with is we have information on a few sort of other cities that have done this. And we've sort of had mentions in other meetings earlier about the state of New Jersey. It's a pretty old provision. Some of the points that are being raised by housing providers and by members of the committee here are sort of empirical questions about, well, what happens when you sort of effectively, raise the cost of renting or of renting out these properties for the provider. I would really like to know, in addition to just knowing sort of what is on the books in these other places, how these have fared, have some of the worst predictions about the loss of housing or sort of ownership changes, the changing ownership structure of who owns multifamily housing. Have those come to fruition? If not, why not? I just think that if we're going to be discussing and drawing from other places that have experimented with this, we should sort of have a fuller picture of what the outcomes have looked like. And of course, we can't control for everything. I'm a social scientist. It's very difficult to sort of isolate a cause, but some of what we're talking about, we should also be discussing in the context of sort of what's known in the few jurisdictions that have already tried this.
Yeah, thank you.
If I can make one last statement, I want to be clear that there's only one portion of this that has a clear, that has a potential and likely clear impact on rent rates, which is the relocation assistance.
Mhm.
That is something that folks are going to have to build into their business model. The provisions around whether or not you can non-renew or when it's appropriate to non-renew or evict, that should have a negligible, if no impact on the current model. The big thing is the relocation assistance, and that actually helps tenants, right? It's not something that we anticipate happening a lot. Hopefully folks are actually following the law and giving folks and allowing folks who've committed no breach of the lease, have paid their rent, allowing those folks to stay in their units. And the only time that would be triggered is if you are going to sell the unit to make it a condo, or which is again an increase in your own profit. And why should the tenant be displaced because you are deciding to leverage your investment and cash in on it? Again, this is
That's not the only time though.
Right, yeah. There's three other.
Let's and so what I'd like to say is I'm happy to take time to meet with I guess up to groups of 2 folks at a time and schedule time to go through this ordinance. There is a lot to it, and I think and maybe we can work in Noreen, who is an attorney who served on the committee. Maybe we can bring her in and help explain this, because I think I'm not saying that folks are approaching this. I'm not casting any aspersions on anyone about their beliefs or where they're coming from. What I am saying is that I think when we walk through the ordinance and have things clarified, this ordinance is not the boogeyman folks think it is. And I think in part, the reason this seems like a huge a change is because we have operated in a world for so long where tenants have lacked basic rights. And now when we are adding basic rights, it seems like it's a huge change when it's just bringing us to what should be a basic framework for housing stability and keeping folks from being displaced.
Okay.
Thank you.
Well, if I could make a last statement to that is that the problem that I see with meeting on a one-on-one basis with Councilmember Reed is that whoever meets with him is going to hear one side of the story. So I think that this is the venue where we should discuss that. If there is any discussion, it should be had here in this committee room.
I trust folks on this committee to have proper discernment. And
Right.
there's
Well-
clearly a bias toward or a leaning toward the interests of the housing providers.
Okay. Yeah.
It's not helpful. It's not a bias towards housing providers. It's not. It's just about taking time. Maybe you have a level understanding to some of this that some of us don't. Maybe we know different pieces of it. Like, we all want to do something good for this city. It's not personal. It's not a lack of your research. It is simply.
I'm not taking it personally. And so I would ask if you want to talk to me personally about that, let's have a personal conversation. I'm just saying, I said what I said. I don't need a lecture.
Well, I personally find it very helpful to have this discussion, labored as it is, with my colleagues up here, as opposed to sitting down and one-on-one and trying to go through this. Because I think we'll just have to. I'll be checking in with staff to figure out how to squeeze this continued discussion into the already jam-packed agenda that we have waiting for us. So
I would ask that we have maybe a special meeting just to discuss this, since folks seem to really need that time. Maybe the meeting shouldn't start at 7 o'clock. It should start earlier. So we can have this discussion around just cause to make sure everyone is up to speed and has the right information and not misinformation.
I just have one more question. This may be a staff question, which is, do we have a deadline for this? I could see it taking more than one meeting. It might not happen on that quick a timeline. And I'm just wondering if we are under some sort of deadline or we have time to slow this down.
In terms of schedule moving forward, there is one meeting that has been scheduled, the special meeting in December that was dedicated to this particular topic. It would require the committee to schedule another special meeting in order to accommodate this conversation, because we have a full agenda for already scheduled HCDC meetings going until March of next year.
Okay, that's helpful, but it's not like council needs us to give a recommended written legislation by like a certain date.
No.
Okay.
There is no mandate on this particular project.
So staff, will you?
And point of order, I just, while there isn't a mandate, my mandate is that every day this law is not in place, there are tenants out in our community that are at risk of being evicted for no cause. I would, if the data that we should be looking at is what is the dwindling Black population in the city, how have rents increased, and what is the connection between that and not having these kinds of protections in place. And so that is my deadline that I am holding myself to. And if we are tenant focused, or we have not a slant or a bias toward housing providers, then I think we all would keep that time frame in mind. Again, we have the women at the Avador and other places in the 5th Ward and the 8th Ward throughout the city that are facing pressures, and we can provide relief for them.
Okay, so staff, we'll put our heads together, look at the calendar, and suggest some dates for another special meeting.
Sounds good.
Okay, so with that, I consider this meeting adjourned. Oops, Marion, did you have something?
We had a couple staff update there
Whoops,
very
oh,
quick.
Okay, yep, thanks.
So one of the staff update was the reminder about the upcoming meeting. You have the November 14th meeting, the December 5th meeting, and the December 12th meeting that we added to the agenda. This November 14th and December 12th are the meetings that are going to focus on HUD action plan, grant allocation, and that formal process that we have to follow and keep on time to be able to keep going through with that work. In preparation to that, I just wanted to remind the committee that on the website on cityofevanston.org/conplan, CONPLAN, which I will send by email to everybody after this meeting. There is all the historical information, HUD action plans, as well as the 2020-2024 consolidated plan that is driving what we're going to propose for this action plan that's coming to you November 14th. So if there's any reading you want to do in preparation, that's going to be on that page.
Great. Okay, thanks.
Let's just pause now to go schedule next time.
Well, we don't have that date.
We don't have a date certain at this point.
Okay. And with that, thank you all very much, and we'll see you soon.